The letter dismissing her from service contained only 3 words beyond the formal salutation: unacceptable moral character. Grace Zimmerman stood on the dusty platform of Wasco, Oregon in June of 1883, clutching that damning piece of paper along with a worn carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world. At 23 years old, she had been cast out without a reference, all because she had dared to contradict Mrs. Hartford when the woman struck her 8-year-old daughter across the face hard enough to leave a bruise. Grace had stepped between them, and for that crime of compassion, she now found herself stranded in a frontier town with exactly $7 to her name and nowhere to go. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden buildings lining the main street. Wasco was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of storefronts and saloons huddled together, as if for protection against the vast emptiness of the high desert surrounding them. Grace had purchased a ticket here on impulse, having overheard 2 women on the train discussing how the town desperately needed school teachers and educated women. That conversation felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only yesterday morning. She walked slowly down the boardwalk, her dark blue traveling dress already covered in a fine layer of dust. Her auburn hair, pinned carefully that morning, had begun to escape its confines, and she pushed a strand behind her ear with trembling fingers. The reality of her situation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Without a reference, no respectable family would hire her as a governess. Without employment, she could not pay for lodging. Without lodging, she would be sleeping in the street within a week. The general store seemed as good a place as any to begin inquiring about work. Grace pushed open the door, grateful for the shade inside. A portly man with mutton chops looked up from behind the counter, his eyes assessing her with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating customers. "Help you, miss?" he asked, not unkindly. "I am looking for employment," Grace said, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I am an experienced governess, well educated in literature, mathematics, geography, French, and music. I can also cook, clean, and manage a household. Do you know of anyone in need of such services?" The shopkeeper scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Governess, you say? Folks around here do not have much use for French lessons, if you take my meaning. Most families teach their own children what they need to know, and those that do not send them to the schoolhouse when Miss Perry makes her rounds. She travels between 3 towns, teaches a month in each." Grace's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "What about housekeeping? Cooking?" "I am willing to do any honest work. Times are hard, miss. Most folks do their own work or have family to help, but you might ask at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen sometimes needs help with the laundry." He paused, studying her face more closely. "You look done in, if you do not mind my saying." "When did you last eat?" "This morning," Grace lied. It had actually been the previous afternoon, but she would not accept charity from a stranger. The shopkeeper did not look convinced, but he merely nodded toward the door. "Boarding house is 3 buildings down on the left. Tell Mrs. Chen that Ezra sent you." Grace thanked him and stepped back into the heat. 3 buildings down, she found a 2-story structure with a painted sign reading, "Chen's Boarding House, Clean Rooms, Fair Prices." She climbed the steps and knocked on the door. A small Chinese woman opened it, her black hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, taking in every detail of Grace's appearance in a single glance. "I am looking for work," Grace said quickly, before her courage could fail. "Ezra at the general store suggested I speak with you. I can do laundry, cook, clean, whatever you need. I am strong and I work hard." Mrs. Chen looked her up and down. "You are educated. I can tell by the way you speak. Why do you need work washing other people's clothes?" Grace hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was a governess. I lost my position without a reference. I need work, any work, or I will have no money for food or shelter. Something flickered in Mrs. Chen's eyes, something that might have been sympathy or recognition. I do not need help right now. But come inside. You look ready to fall over. I will give you tea and you can rest while I think. The kindness nearly undid Grace's carefully maintained composure. She blinked back tears and followed Mrs. Chen into a surprisingly spacious parlor. The older woman disappeared into a back room and returned with a pot of tea and 2 cups, along with a plate of rice cakes. Eat, Mrs. Chen commanded, pouring the tea. Then tell me your story, the truth. As Grace ate, she explained everything. The position with the Hartford family in San Francisco, the incident with young Millicent, the dismissal. She did not embellish or make excuses. Mrs. Chen listened in silence, sipping her tea and watching Grace's face. You did the right thing, Mrs. Chen said finally. Protecting a child is never wrong, no matter what some fancy lady says. But you are in a difficult position now. Without a reference, respectable families will not hire you. With your education and speech, working in a saloon or laundry will raise eyebrows. People will make assumptions about why an educated woman must do such work. Grace nodded miserably. She had already reached the same conclusions. However, Mrs. Chen continued, there might be one possibility. A man came through town yesterday, a rancher named Samuel Frost. He owns a spread about 15 miles from here. He was asking at the general store if anyone knew of a woman who might be willing to come keep house and help with his nephew. The boy is 9 years old. Mr. Frost's sister and her husband died of fever last winter, and he took the child in. He is trying to raise the boy himself, but a ranch is no easy place for a child without a woman's influence. Hope flickered in Grace's chest. Did he leave any way to contact him? He said he would return to town in 3 days to pick up supplies. That would be tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Chen refilled Grace's teacup. I will make you a deal. You can stay here tonight and tomorrow night, no charge. In exchange, you help me with the washing tomorrow morning. When Mr. Frost comes to town, I will introduce you. If he hires you, good. If not, we will figure something else out. I do not leave educated young women to starve in the street. Grace felt tears prick her eyes again. Thank you. I do not know how to thank you. Thank me by being honest with him. Tell him why you lost your position. If he is a good man, he will understand. If he is not, you would not want to work for him anyway. That night, Grace lay in a small but clean room on the 2nd floor of the boarding house, staring at the ceiling and wondering about Samuel Frost. What kind of man took in his orphan nephew and then sought help raising him? Most men in his situation would have sent the boy to relatives or an orphanage. The fact that he wanted to keep the child and was willing to hire help spoke well of his character. She tried not to hope too much. Disappointment was easier to bear when you expected it. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn and helped Mrs. Chen with the washing. The work was back-breaking, hauling water and scrubbing sheets and clothing until her hands were raw. But it felt good to be useful, to earn her keep through honest labor. By noon, they had hung the last of the laundry to dry in the fierce sun. Go clean yourself up, Mrs. Chen instructed. He usually comes to town around 3 o'clock. You want to look presentable. Grace washed as best she could in the basin in her room, then changed into her other dress, a gray cotton that was plain but clean and neatly pressed. She repinned her hair, forcing her hands to remain steady, and studied herself in the small mirror. She looked pale and worried, but respectable. It would have to do. At 3:15, Mrs. Chen called up the stairs. Mr. Frost is at the general store. Come. Grace descended the stairs, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. She followed Mrs. Chen down the boardwalk to the general store, where a tall man was discussing an order with Ezra. He wore typical rancher clothing, worn denim pants and a faded blue shirt, with a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. When he turned at their entrance, Grace caught her breath. Samuel Frost was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair sun bleached at the edges and brown eyes that looked tired and worried. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with fine lines around his eyes and a scar along his jawline. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something solid and dependable about him, something that made Grace instinctively trust him. "Mr. Frost," Mrs. Chen said briskly, "this is Miss Grace Zimmerman. She arrived in town 2 days ago. She is an experienced governess looking for a position. I believe she might be exactly what you need for your nephew." Samuel's eyes moved to Grace, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. He had clearly expected someone older, more matronly perhaps. Grace met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away despite her nervousness. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice a deep rumble, "I appreciate you coming to speak with me, but I should be honest. I am not looking for a governess exactly. The boy, his name is Thomas, he needs more than book learning right now. He needs someone to cook decent meals, to mend his clothes, to make sure he washes behind his ears and says his prayers. His parents have been gone half a year now, and I am doing my best, but a ranch does not run itself. I am out from sunup to sundown most days. The boy is alone too much, and it is not good for him." "I understand," Grace said quietly. "I can provide all of those things, Mr. Frost, and I can also teach him to read and write properly, to do his sums, to learn about the world beyond this town. Children need both practical care and education." Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that seemed habitual. "I should also be honest about compensation. I cannot pay much. Room and board, of course, and $30 a month." "I know that is not what a governess typically earns. It is more than fair," Grace interrupted. "Mr. Frost, I should be honest with you as well. I was dismissed from my last position without a reference. If you want to know why before you make any decision, I will tell you. I promised myself I would not lie or hide the truth." Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening around his eyes. "All right, tell me." Grace explained the incident with the Hartford family, watching his face for any sign of judgment or dismissal. Instead, she saw his jaw tighten and a flash of something that looked like anger. "You were fired for protecting a child from being beaten?" he asked when she finished. "Yes." "Then the Hartfords are fools, and I am glad to offer you a position, Miss Zimmerman, if you will take it. I need someone who will protect Thomas, not someone who will look the other way when something is wrong. When can you start?" Grace felt dizzy with relief. "Immediately, if that suits you. I have my things with me." "Good. I need to finish my business here, then we can head out to the ranch. It is about 3 hours by wagon. We should arrive before dark." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I should warn you, it is not fancy. It is just me and Thomas rattling around in a house meant for a family. My sister kept it nice when she was alive, but since she passed, it has gotten pretty rough. I try, but I am not much good at that sort of thing. I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Frost." "Samuel," he said, "if you are going to be living under my roof and taking care of my nephew, you might as well call me Samuel. Then you should call me Grace." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Grace it is." Mrs. Chen, who had been watching this exchange with satisfaction, spoke up. "I will help you get your bag, Grace. Samuel, you treat this girl right. She is a good person." "I can see that," Samuel said simply. Within the hour, Grace found herself sitting on the bench seat of Samuel's wagon, her carpetbag at her feet, watching the town of Wasco recede behind them. The landscape was starkly beautiful, all rolling hills covered in dry grass and sagebrush, with the distant mountains purple against the horizon. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden. Samuel drove in silence for a while, and Grace was content to let him. She was still processing the rapid turn her fortunes had taken. This morning she had been washing sheets with raw hands, uncertain of her future. Now she was employed, heading toward a new home and a new life. "Tell me about Thomas," she said finally. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "He is a good boy. Quiet, maybe too quiet. Before the fever took his parents, he was always laughing, always getting into mischief the way boys do. Since he came to live with me, he hardly talks at all. He does his chores, eats what I put in front of him, goes to bed when I tell him. But it is like part of him died with his parents." "That is normal," Grace said gently. "Grief, especially in children, can manifest as withdrawal. He needs time and patience and someone to show him that it is safe to feel things again." "I do not know how to do that," Samuel admitted. "I never married, never had children. I love the boy, he is my sister's son, but I do not know what to say to him. Half the time I feel like I am just making things worse." "You took him in when you could have sent him away. That tells him he is wanted." "That is the foundation everything else builds on." Samuel glanced at her, surprise evident in his face. "You sound like you know what you are talking about." "I have worked with many children over the years, some from happy homes, some from troubled ones. They are all different, but they all need the same basic things: love, security, boundaries, and someone who sees them as they truly are." "My sister would have liked you," Samuel said quietly. "She always said the most important job in the world was raising children right. That is why it near killed her to think of Thomas alone after she died. She made me promise, right there at the end, that I would keep him, raise him like my own. I gave her my word." The pain in his voice was evident, and Grace felt her heart contract with sympathy. "What was your sister's name?" "Sarah. Sarah Montgomery. Her husband was James. They were good people, both of them. They did not deserve to die like that, burning up with fever while Thomas listened from the next room. The boy heard his mother calling for him at the end, but I would not let him go in. I did not want him catching it too. Sometimes I wonder if that was the right choice. He never got to say goodbye." "You saved his life," Grace said firmly. "He can hate you for it now if he needs to, but someday he will understand." "Does he hate me?" Samuel asked, and there was real worry in his voice. "I cannot tell. He looks at me with those big eyes, and I have no idea what he is thinking." "I will talk to him," Grace promised. "Not right away. I will need to earn his trust first. But I will find out what he is feeling, and I will help him through it." They rode in silence for a while longer. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grace studied Samuel's profile as he drove, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he squinted against the light. He was carrying a heavy burden, trying to run a ranch and raise a grieving child alone. She found herself wanting to help him, not just because it was her job, but because something about his quiet decency called to her. "Why did you never marry?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that was too forward." "No, it is all right." "I do not mind you asking." Samuel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "I was engaged once, about 8 years ago. Her name was Elizabeth. She was from town, the daughter of a merchant. Pretty, well-educated, everything a man could want. We planned to marry in the spring. Then her father lost his business, some bad investments. She left Oregon, went back east to live with relatives. Wrote me a letter saying she could not be a rancher's wife, that she needed more than I could give her. I am sorry. I was too at the time. Near broke my heart. But looking back, I can see it was for the best. She would have been miserable out here. This life is not for everyone." He paused. "What about you? A woman like you, educated and kind, I would have thought you would have married by now." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have had opportunities. Proposals from fathers of children I taught, from men I met through families I worked for. But none of them felt right. They wanted a wife who would be decorative and obedient, who would run their household and not ask questions. I could not imagine spending my life that way." "You want more than that." "I want a partner," Grace said, surprised by her own honesty. "Someone who values my mind as well as my domestic skills. Someone who sees me as an equal, not as property or an ornament." "I know such men are rare, perhaps non-existent, but I would rather be alone than settle for less." "They exist," Samuel said quietly. "My father treated my mother as a partner. He valued her opinion on everything from which crops to plant to how to handle disputes with neighbors. When she died, it was like he lost half of himself. He only lasted 2 years after she passed. I think he died of missing her." "That sounds like real love." It was. Samuel turned the wagon onto a narrow track leading away from the main road. "We are almost there, just over this rise." They crested a hill, and Grace saw the ranch spread out below them. It was not large or impressive, just a simple wooden house with a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. But it was set in a little valley with a creek running through it, and there were trees around the house, offering shade. Chickens scratched in the yard, and she could see cattle in the distance. It looked like a working ranch, practical and plain, but it also looked like it could be a home. As they approached, the front door opened and a small figure stepped out onto the porch. Thomas was thin, with dark hair like his uncle and enormous brown eyes that seemed too large for his face. He wore clothes that had been mended multiple times, and his feet were bare despite the rough ground. He watched their approach with an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile, just blank. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then came around to help Grace descend. His hand was rough and warm, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest at the contact. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on the boy. "Thomas," Samuel said, his voice gentler than Grace had yet heard it. "This is Miss Zimmerman, Grace. She is going to be staying with us, helping out around the place and making sure you have someone here when I am working." "Grace, this is my nephew, Thomas Montgomery." Grace approached slowly, not wanting to overwhelm the child. She crouched down so she was at his eye level, ignoring the dust on her skirt. "Hello, Thomas. I am very pleased to meet you. Your uncle has told me a great deal about you." Thomas looked at her with those enormous eyes, then glanced at Samuel. "Is she going to leave too?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. The question hit Grace like a physical blow. This child had lost so much already, and now he was afraid to trust anyone new because they might disappear like everyone else. "No," she said firmly, making a promise she had no idea if she could keep, but knowing it was what he needed to hear. "I am not going anywhere, Thomas. I am here to stay." "That is what Mama said," Thomas whispered. "But she left anyway." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Your Mama did not want to leave you. Sometimes terrible things happen that are beyond our control. But I promise you, I will be here as long as you need me." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the house. Samuel let out a long breath. "That is more than he usually says to anyone. I think he might actually like you." Grace stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "He is testing me, trying to see if I will be hurt by his coldness and give up. Children who have been abandoned, even through death, often push people away to protect themselves from more hurt." How do you know so much about this? Grace looked at him steadily. Because I was an orphan too. My parents died when I was 7. I went to live with an aunt who made it very clear that I was a burden. She sent me to boarding school as soon as she could, and I spent vacations with whichever teachers took pity on me. I know what it feels like to be alone and afraid, wondering if anyone will ever truly want you. That is why I became a governess. I wanted to give other children the love and attention I never had. Samuel's expression softened. I am sorry. That must have been hard. It was. But it made me who I am. Sometimes our worst experiences teach us the most important lessons. She picked up her carpetbag. Now, perhaps you could show me where I will be staying, and then I will see what I can do about preparing supper. I imagine you both could use a decent meal. The house was indeed rough, as Samuel had warned. The front room served as a living area, with a fireplace and a few pieces of worn furniture. The kitchen was functional but sparse, and dishes were piled in the wash basin. Grace could see 2 bedrooms opening off the main room, one larger than the other. The big room was my sister's, Samuel said. Thomas sleeps in there now. The smaller room is mine. I figured you could have the big room and I will bunk down out in the barn. Absolutely not, Grace said firmly. You are not sleeping in the barn. I will take the small room. It will be more than adequate for my needs. It is not proper, me and you under the same roof without a chaperone. Mr. Frost, Samuel, we are in the middle of nowhere. There is no one to gossip, and I do not care about propriety as much as I care about practicality. You need to be in the house with Thomas. He has lost too much already. He needs to know you are there, that he is safe. Besides, she added with a small smile, I suspect propriety went out the window the moment you hired a governess without a reference to live in your home. Samuel actually laughed, a rusty sound as if he was out of practice. You have a point. All right, the small room is yours. Fair warning, it is barely big enough for the bed. I have slept in worse places, I assure you. Grace spent the next hour exploring the house and taking inventory of the supplies in the kitchen. There was flour, salt, a little sugar, dried beans, and some salt pork. Not much to work with, but enough for a basic meal. She found Thomas sitting on his bed staring at the wall. Thomas, she said gently from the doorway, I am going to make supper. Would you like to help me? I could use someone to show me where everything is in the kitchen. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slightly and slid off the bed. In the kitchen, he showed her where the pots were kept, where the plates and cups were stored. His movements were precise and careful, and Grace realized he had been doing these tasks for a while, probably since his mother died. You are very helpful, she said. Your mama taught you well. She said everyone should know how to take care of themselves, Thomas said quietly. She taught me to cook and clean and mend. Papa taught me to ride and rope and take care of animals. They said I needed to know everything to be a man someday. They were wise, and I can see they did a wonderful job raising you. You should be very proud to be their son. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back fiercely. I miss them. Of course you do. Missing people we love never goes away completely, but it does get easier to bear, I promise you, and talking about them helps. Would you like to tell me about them while we cook? As Grace prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Thomas began to talk. Slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, he told her about his mother's laugh, his father's terrible jokes, the way his mother sang while she worked, how his father would lift him onto his shoulders so he could see far into the distance. Grace listened, asked questions, and let him remember. By the time Samuel came in from checking on the animals, the smell of food filled the house and Thomas was setting the table. Samuel stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene before him. I have not seen him like this in months, he said quietly to Grace. "What did you do?" "I asked him to tell me about his parents. Sometimes grief needs to be spoken aloud before it can begin to heal." They sat down to eat, and for the first time since Sarah and James died, the house felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep. Thomas ate with actual appetite, and Samuel looked less careworn. Grace felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was why she did this work. Not for the money or the prestige, but for moments like this, when she could make a real difference in someone's life. After supper, Grace insisted on cleaning up while Samuel went through some papers at the table. Thomas brought her a book, one of the few in the house, and asked if she would read to him. It was a collection of Aesop's fables, worn and well-loved. Grace settled into a chair by the fireplace and Thomas sat on the floor near her feet, and she read until his eyelids grew heavy. "Time for bed," Samuel said, standing up and stretching. "Come on, Thomas. Say good night to Grace." "Good night, Grace," Thomas said, then surprised everyone by stepping closer and hugging her briefly before running to his room. Grace sat frozen, her hand still raised from where she had automatically moved to hug him back. The gesture had been so quick, so tentative, but it meant everything. "He has not done that since Sarah died," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have a gift, Grace. I do not know how to thank you. You already have. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. That is thanks enough." That night, lying in the small room on a surprisingly comfortable bed, Grace listened to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere an owl hooted, and she could hear the cattle lowing in the distance. It was different from any place she had lived before, but it did not feel foreign. It felt, inexplicably, like she had come home. The days settled into a rhythm. Grace woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, and Samuel would eat quickly before heading out to work on the ranch. Thomas helped with the dishes, then Grace would begin his lessons. She discovered that he was bright and eager to learn, despite his grief. His mother had taught him to read, but he needed work on his writing and mathematics. Grace made the lessons as engaging as possible, using examples from ranch life to illustrate mathematical concepts, and letting him read adventure stories as a reward for completing his work. In the afternoons, while Thomas did his chores, Grace worked on the house. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, mended clothes, and organized cupboards. Slowly, the house began to look less rough and more lived in. She found curtains in a trunk that had belonged to Sarah and hung them in the windows. She discovered a tablecloth and started using it for meals. Small touches, but they made a difference. Samuel noticed the changes. One evening, about 2 weeks after Grace's arrival, he looked around the house and said, "It looks like a home again. Sarah would be pleased." "I hope so," Grace said. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the lamplight. "I found some flower seeds in the barn. I thought I might plant a garden if that would be all right. Nothing fancy, just some vegetables and maybe some flowers near the porch." "You do not have to ask permission for things like that. This is your home now, too." Samuel paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I wanted to say you are doing more than I hired you for. The boy is like a different child. He smiles now. He talks. Yesterday I heard him laughing. I cannot remember the last time I heard him laugh. He is healing. Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved." "That is because of you," Samuel insisted. "Before you came, this house was just a place where we existed. Now it feels alive again. I cannot pay you more, but I want you to know that what you are doing matters. It matters to Thomas and it matters to me." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. That means more than money ever could." Their eyes met across the room and something passed between them, something neither was quite ready to name. Grace looked away first, focusing intently on her mending. She could not afford to develop feelings for Samuel. He was her employer, and she was his employee. Any romantic entanglement would complicate everything and potentially leave her homeless again if things went wrong. But as the weeks passed, it became harder to deny what she was feeling. Samuel was kind and hardworking, devoted to his nephew, and unfailingly respectful toward her. He asked her opinion on matters related to the ranch, valued her insights about Thomas, and treated her as an equal. He was exactly the kind of man she had always hoped to find, and he was completely off limits. One hot afternoon in July, about a month after her arrival, Grace was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats. Samuel came riding up fast, his face pale with worry. "Is Thomas with you?" he asked before he had even dismounted. "He is doing his lessons inside." "Why?" "What is wrong?" Samuel sagged with relief. "Thank God. There was a cougar spotted near the south pasture. I was worried if Thomas was out playing somewhere alone. Those cats are dangerous, especially to children." "He is safe inside," Grace assured him. "But thank you for checking." Samuel nodded and started to lead his horse toward the barn, then stopped. "Grace, would you mind keeping Thomas inside for the rest of the day? I am going to ride the property line with my rifle, make sure that cat has moved on. I should be back before dark, but if I am not, bolt the door and do not let Thomas out for any reason." "I understand. Be careful." "Always am," he said with a crooked smile that made her heart skip. Samuel returned just as the sun was setting, dusty and tired but unharmed. He had not found the cougar, but he had found tracks leading away from the ranch, back up into the mountains. Over supper, he told Thomas about the cougar, explaining that the boy needed to stay close to the house for the next few days until they were certain it had moved on. "I wish I could have seen it," Thomas said wistfully. "Mama once told me about seeing a cougar when she was a girl. She said it was the most beautiful thing she ever saw." "It was probably beautiful," Samuel agreed, "but also very dangerous. Your mama was smart to admire it from a distance and then get to safety. That is what we need to do too." That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Samuel lingered at the table while Grace cleaned up from supper. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Are you happy here? I know this is not what you are used to. No fancy houses, no society, just hard work and loneliness. If you want to leave, I would understand. I would write you a reference. Tell anyone who asks that you are the finest governess I have ever known." Grace turned to face him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Samuel, I am happier here than I have been anywhere else in my life. I am not leaving, not unless you want me to go." "I do not want that," he said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure you were not staying out of obligation, or because you felt you had no other choice. I am staying because this is where I want to be. This ranch, this house, you and Thomas, this is more of a home than anywhere I have lived since my parents died. I feel like I belong here in a way I have never belonged anywhere else." Samuel stood and moved closer, stopping just an arm's length away. "I am glad, because I cannot imagine this place without you anymore. You have changed everything, made it better." Grace's breath caught in her throat. They stood there, looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Samuel lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let it fall. "I should get some sleep," he said roughly. "Morning comes early." "Yes. Good night, Samuel." "Good night, Grace." But neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, Samuel forced himself to turn away and walk to his room. Grace finished cleaning up with shaking hands, her mind whirling. He felt it too, this pull between them. She was almost certain of it, but what could they do about it? Nothing had changed about their situation. He was still her employer, and she was still dependent on him for her livelihood and housing. In August, Grace had been at the ranch for 2 months. The garden she had planted was thriving, providing fresh vegetables for their meals. Thomas was reading at a level far beyond his age, and his writing had improved dramatically. He smiled regularly now, and sometimes even seemed like a normal 9-year-old boy, instead of a child frozen by grief. Samuel's ranch was doing well. The cattle were healthy, and he had sold a small herd for a good price. Everything should have been perfect, but Grace was increasingly aware of her growing feelings for Samuel. Every time he smiled at her, every time their hands accidentally touched when passing plates at dinner, every time he asked her opinion on something important, she fell a little more in love with him. And she was fairly certain, based on the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, that he felt the same way. One evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, Samuel asked Grace to come outside with him. They walked away from the house, toward the creek that ran through the property. The night was clear and warm with a canopy of stars overhead. "I have been thinking about something for a while now," Samuel said, his voice low. "I did not know how to bring it up, but I do not think I can wait any longer." Grace's heart pounded. "What is it?" "Grace, these past 2 months have been the best of my life since my sister died. Not just because the house is clean and Thomas is happy, but because of you. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you hum while you cook, the way you look at the world like everything is an adventure. I find myself looking forward to coming back to the house every day just so I can see you. And I know this is probably wrong, that I am your employer and I should not be saying any of this, but I cannot help how I feel." "How do you feel?" Grace whispered. Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and intense. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have already fallen. I do not know. All I know is that when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. Not just as Thomas's governess or as someone who keeps my house. As my partner, my wife, if you will have me." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "You want to marry me, more than I have ever wanted anything, but I need to know that you feel the same way. I will not pressure you, or make you feel obligated just because I am your employer. If you want to stay as Thomas's governess and nothing more, I will respect that. If you want to leave and find another position, I will give you that reference I promised, and enough money to travel wherever you want to go. But if there is any chance that you might feel for me what I feel for you, I need to know." Grace reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "Samuel, I have been in love with you for weeks. I just did not think I could tell you because I was afraid of what might happen if you did not feel the same way. Of course I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Samuel let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for hours. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope and all the feelings they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "I do not have a ring," Samuel said. "I did not want to assume anything, but tomorrow we can go into town and you can pick out whatever you want." "I do not need a fancy ring," Grace said. "I just need you. You have me, for as long as you will keep me." They walked back to the house hand in hand, talking quietly about their future. They would marry as soon as possible, maybe in a few weeks once they could arrange for a preacher to come out to the ranch. Thomas would finally have the mother figure he needed, and Grace would have the family she had always wanted. It felt like everything was falling into place exactly as it should. The next morning at breakfast, Samuel announced their engagement to Thomas. The boy looked surprised, then thoughtful, then cautiously pleased. "Does this mean Grace is staying forever?" he asked. "If that is all right with you," Grace said. "I know I can never replace your mother, Thomas. I would never try to do that. But I love you and I love your uncle, and I would very much like to be part of this family." Thomas considered this seriously. Then he nodded. "I think Mama would like you. She always said Uncle Samuel should get married and have a family. She used to tease him about it all the time." Samuel laughed, a sound of pure joy. "She did indeed. She told me more than once that I was going to end up a lonely old bachelor if I did not find a good woman. I wish she could have met Grace. They would have been good friends." "Maybe she can see us from heaven," Thomas suggested. "Maybe she is happy that we are all together." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I hope so. I would like to think that your Mama and Papa know you are safe and loved and that you are going to be all right." They rode into town that afternoon, all three of them crowded onto the wagon bench. Grace sat in the middle, with Thomas pressed against her side and Samuel's shoulder warm against hers. At the general store, Samuel insisted on buying her a ring from the small selection Ezra kept. It was a simple gold band with a tiny diamond, nothing fancy, but to Grace it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Mrs. Chen, when they stopped at the boarding house to share the news, embraced Grace warmly. "I knew when I saw you two together that first day that something would come of it. You belong together. When is the wedding?" "As soon as we can arrange it," Samuel said. "Maybe 3 weeks. We need to find a preacher and send word to a few friends and relatives. Nothing big, just a simple ceremony." "You will have it here," Mrs. Chen declared, "in my parlor. I will make the food and we will decorate and it will be beautiful. No arguing." Grace hugged her again, overwhelmed by the kindness. "Thank you for everything. If you had not introduced us that day, none of this would have happened." "You brought your own good fortune," Mrs. Chen said. "I just made the introduction. The rest was all you." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Grace made herself a new dress from fabric Samuel bought in town, a soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Chen enlisted the help of several women from town to prepare food and decorations. Samuel rode to a neighboring ranch to personally invite the family there, old friends who had known his sister. Word spread, and before they knew it, half the town seemed to be planning to attend. "I thought you said a simple ceremony," Grace teased Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I said that. I did not count on Mrs. Chen turning it into the social event of the season." But he was smiling, and Grace could tell he did not really mind. Thomas was excited about the wedding, asking endless questions about what would happen and what his role would be. Grace assured him that he was the most important guest and that he would stand with them during the ceremony. The boy seemed to grow taller with pride at the responsibility. On a sunny September morning, exactly 3 months after Grace had arrived in Wasco with nothing but a carpetbag and $7, she married Samuel Frost in Mrs. Chen's parlor. The room was packed with people, many of whom Grace had never met but who clearly cared about Samuel and Thomas. The preacher, a kind-faced man who traveled a circuit through eastern Oregon, performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When Samuel slipped the ring on Grace's finger and kissed her to seal their vows, Thomas cheered along with everyone else. The celebration afterward was joyful, with food and music and dancing. Grace found herself passed from one conversation to another, welcomed warmly by the community as Samuel's wife. It was overwhelming and wonderful all at once. Late in the afternoon, as the party was winding down, Grace stepped outside for a moment of quiet. Mrs. Chen joined her on the porch. "You look happy," the older woman observed. "I am. Happier than I ever thought possible. You deserve it. You are a good person, Grace Frost. And you have given that man and that boy something precious. You have given them hope and a future." "They gave me the same thing," Grace said. "I was lost when I came here. Samuel found me and saw past the circumstances to who I really am. He took a chance on me when no one else would. And now you have a family and a home, That is how it should be. They returned to the ranch late that evening, all three tired but content. Thomas went straight to bed, exhausted from the excitement. Samuel and Grace stood in the main room, suddenly shy with each other now that they were alone as husband and wife. "Are you tired?" Samuel asked. "A little. It has been quite a day." "The best day," he said, moving closer. "Grace, I know we did not have much time to talk about expectations and such, but I want you to know that there is no pressure. We can take things as slowly as you need to." Grace smiled and reached for his hand. "Samuel, I love you. I married you because I want to build a life with you in every way. I do not need to go slowly. I am exactly where I want to be." He pulled her close and kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When they finally made their way to the larger bedroom, which was now theirs to share, Grace felt no fear or uncertainty. This was right. He was right. They were right together. The months that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. She threw herself into her roles as wife and mother, because that was how she thought of herself in relation to Thomas. He started calling her Grace still, but sometimes he would slip and call her Ma, then look embarrassed. She always smiled when it happened and told him it was all right, that he could call her whatever felt comfortable. The ranch prospered. Samuel worked hard, but now he came home to a warm house and a family who loved him. The difference it made was evident in everything from his increased energy to the way he smiled more easily. Grace continued Thomas's lessons, and by the spring of 1884, the boy was reading and writing at a level that would have impressed any teacher. In March, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Samuel one evening after Thomas had gone to bed. "I think I am with child," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Samuel's eyes widened, then filled with wonder. "Truly. We are going to have a baby, it seems so. Probably in late October or early November if my calculations are correct." Samuel let out a whoop of joy that made Grace laugh. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, worried he had been too rough. "I am sorry. I should be careful. Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" "Samuel, I am pregnant, not fragile. I am perfectly fine, but I am glad you are happy about it." "Happy, Grace, I am over the moon. A baby. Our baby." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Does Thomas know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first, but we should tell him soon. He will want to know." They told Thomas the next morning at breakfast. The boy's face went through a complicated series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then slowly delight. "I am going to be a big brother?" he asked. "Yes," Grace said. "In about 7 months. What do you think about that?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. "I think Mama would be happy. She always said she wanted more babies, but then she got sick and could not have any more. She used to tell me that being a big brother is an important job, that I would have to help teach the baby everything." "That is exactly right," Samuel said. "We will be counting on you to help with the baby. You will be the best big brother." Thomas beamed with pride. "I can teach the baby to ride, and to rope, and to read, just like Mama and Papa and you and Grace taught me." As Grace's pregnancy progressed, life on the ranch continued. Samuel hired a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work so that Grace would not strain herself. His name was Peter Wright, and he was 18, eager to learn ranching and save money to buy his own land someday. He was respectful and hardworking, and Thomas enjoyed having someone new to follow around and pepper with questions. In June, there was a scare when a wildfire broke out in the hills to the west. Samuel and Peter worked for 2 days alongside other ranchers to create fire breaks and prevent the flames from spreading to the valley. Grace and Thomas stayed at the ranch, packing important documents and valuables in case they needed to evacuate quickly. The house filled with smoke, and Grace tied wet cloths over their faces to help them breathe. Finally, on the third day, rain came and put out the fire. Samuel returned home exhausted and covered in soot, but safe. Grace burst into tears of relief when she saw him, and he held her close, murmuring apologies for worrying her. "I am all right," he said. "We all are. The fire never reached any of the ranches and no one was hurt, but it was close." "Too close." "Promise me you will be careful," Grace said. "This baby needs a father and Thomas needs you and I need you. Please promise me you will not take unnecessary risks." "I promise," Samuel said. "I have too much to live for now. I would not leave you if I could help it." Summer turned to fall, and Grace grew larger and more uncomfortable. By late October, she was ready for the baby to arrive. Mrs. Chen came to stay at the ranch for a few weeks, helping with the household tasks that Grace could no longer manage easily and preparing for the birth. Samuel fussed over Grace constantly, worrying about every twinge and ache. On a cold November night, Grace went into labor. Samuel rode for the midwife in town while Mrs. Chen stayed with Grace, timing contractions and offering words of encouragement. Thomas, frightened by what was happening, stayed in his room until Mrs. Chen convinced him to sit with Grace between contractions, holding her hand and telling her about a book he had been reading. The labor was long and difficult. Grace had not expected the pain to be so intense, but she gritted her teeth and focused on the fact that at the end of this, she would have a baby. Samuel returned with the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Harrison, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She examined Grace and pronounced everything normal, then settled in to wait. Just before dawn, after hours of labor, Grace finally delivered a healthy baby boy. Samuel was there for the birth, holding her hand and whispering words of love and encouragement. When Mrs. Harrison placed the baby in Grace's arms, both she and Samuel wept with joy. "He is perfect," Samuel said, touching his son's tiny hand with one finger. "Grace, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Grace asked, looking up at her husband's tear-streaked face. "James," Samuel said immediately. "After Thomas's father, if that is all right with you." "James Frost," Grace said, testing the name. "It is perfect." They called Thomas in to meet his new brother. The boy approached cautiously, awed by the tiny creature in Grace's arms. "He is so small," Thomas whispered. "You were this small once too," Grace told him. "Every baby starts out tiny, then they grow, and you are going to help him grow strong and smart, remember?" "I remember," Thomas said solemnly. "I am going to be the best big brother ever." The baby thrived. James was a relatively easy infant, sleeping well and eating heartily. Grace recovered quickly from the birth, and soon life settled into a new rhythm. Samuel was a devoted father, taking James from Grace whenever she needed a rest and walking the floors with him when he fussed. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help change diapers or fetch things for the baby. As winter set in, the little family stayed close to home, cozy in their warm house. Samuel had done well financially that year, and he surprised Grace with a new stove for the kitchen and fabric for new curtains. Small luxuries, but they made her feel cherished. One snowy evening in December, after the children were both asleep, Grace and Samuel sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting on his chest. "Are you happy?" he asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them. "Impossibly happy," Grace answered as she always did. "You have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, love, purpose. I could not ask for more." "I should be the one thanking you," Samuel said. "You walked into our lives when we needed you most. You saved Thomas and you saved me." Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." Grace tilted her head up to look at him. "We saved each other. I was lost, and you found me. You took a chance on a woman with no reference and no prospects. You saw who I really was, not who society said I should be." "I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with," Samuel said, and kissed her softly. The years passed peacefully. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy. He had his mother's auburn hair and his father's brown eyes, and he was fearless and curious about everything. Thomas graduated from Grace's informal lessons and began helping more seriously on the ranch, learning all the skills he would need to be a rancher himself someday. In 1887, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Samuel's sister. The baby looked like Grace, with delicate features and blue eyes, and she had a sweet, gentle temperament. Thomas and James both doted on their little sister, and Samuel would often be found just staring at her in wonder, marveling that something so precious could be his. The ranch continued to grow. Samuel bought more land and expanded the herd. Peter Wright, who had stayed on as a ranch hand, eventually saved enough to buy his own small spread nearby, and he and Samuel became business partners in some of their dealings. The community around Wasco grew as well, with more families settling in the area. Through it all, Grace remained the heart of the family. She was the one who kissed skinned knees and soothed nightmares, who taught the children their letters and their prayers, who kept the house running smoothly no matter what crises arose. But she was also Samuel's partner in every sense, discussing ranch business with him, offering advice on difficult decisions, and standing beside him through good times and bad. One spring evening in 1889, Grace realized with a start that it had been 6 years since she arrived in Wasco with nothing but a carpet bag and desperate hope. She stood on the porch of the house, watching the sun set over the hills, and thought about how much had changed. The frightened, unemployed governess was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and her place in the world. Samuel came out to join her, sliding an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Just remembering the day we met. I was so scared, so certain that I had reached the end of any good possibilities. And then Mrs. Chen introduced us, and you looked at me like I might be the answer to your prayers instead of a woman without prospects." "You were the answer to my prayers," Samuel said. "I just did not know it yet. I thought I needed someone to keep house and watch Thomas. What I really needed was you, specifically you, my partner, my love, the mother of my children." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Samuel Frost, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You gave me everything." "No," Samuel said, touching her face gently. "We gave each other everything. That is what love is supposed to be, not one person saving another, but two people building something together that neither could have built alone." From inside the house came the sound of Sarah crying and Thomas trying to calm her while James sang an off-key lullaby. Grace and Samuel both laughed. "We should probably rescue her," Grace said. "Probably. But first this." Samuel kissed her, a kiss that held all the love and commitment and partnership of their years together. They went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the evening and the years ahead would bring. Because they had each other, and that was everything. The children grew and thrived. Thomas, at 15, was nearly as tall as Samuel and took on more responsibility on the ranch. He was a quiet, thoughtful young man, still marked by the loss of his parents but no longer defined by it. Grace's patient love and Samuel's steady guidance had helped him heal, and he had grown into someone Sarah and James Montgomery would have been proud of. James, at 5 years old, was all energy and mischief, constantly getting into minor scrapes and driving his older siblings crazy with his endless questions. He loved the ranch animals and announced regularly that he was going to be a rancher just like his papa when he grew up. Sarah, at 2, was a sweet-natured child who loved being read to and helping her mother with small tasks around the house. She adored all 3 of her male family members and had them all wrapped around her tiny finger. In the summer of 1889, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the announcement was met with cheers from all 3 children. Sarah did not really understand what was happening, but she picked up on the excitement and clapped her hands along with everyone else. "Another baby," James shouted. "I hope it is a boy so I can teach him to ride horses." "What if it is a girl?" Grace asked, amused. "Then I will teach her to ride horses," James said pragmatically. "Everyone should know how to ride horses." This pregnancy was easier than the previous 2, and Grace felt stronger and healthier throughout. In late February of 1890, she delivered another son, whom they named Benjamin. He was a big baby with a powerful set of lungs, and from the start it was clear he had a personality to match. The house was full and busy and chaotic, and Grace had never been happier. On particularly hectic days, when Benjamin was crying and Sarah needed attention, and James was tracking mud through the kitchen, and Thomas needed help with something on the ranch, she would sometimes pause and remember that cold day at the train station in Wasco. Remember the fear and uncertainty, the letter declaring her to have unacceptable moral character, the desperate hope that had driven her to Mrs. Chen's door. All of that had led her here, to this noisy, messy, perfect life. If Mrs. Hartford had not fired her, if she had not gotten on that train, if Mrs. Chen had not introduced her to Samuel, none of this would exist. Her children would not exist. This family would not exist. It was strange how the worst moments of your life could turn out to be the doorways to the best ones. Samuel seemed to be thinking along similar lines one evening as they sat together after finally getting all the children to sleep. Benjamin was 6 months old, sleeping in a cradle near their bed, and the house was finally quiet. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Not becoming a proper governess in some fancy house, not having an easier life." Grace looked at him in genuine surprise. "Regret this? Samuel, this is everything I ever wanted. I did not know it was what I wanted until I found it, but now I cannot imagine wanting anything else." "Do you regret hiring a governess without a reference who ended up taking over your whole life?" Samuel pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made. Though I have to admit, when Mrs. Chen first introduced us, I did not think you would last a month. You seemed too refined, too educated for ranch life. I thought you would get bored or homesick and leave. And instead I fell in love with your nephew, your ranch, and you." "In that order," Grace teased. "In that order." Samuel pretended to be offended. "Well, Thomas was very sweet and the ranch is beautiful. You were a somewhat distant third initially." "Only somewhat distant. I will take it." They laughed together, comfortable in their love and their partnership. Outside, the wind howled across the high desert, but inside they were warm and safe. Their children slept peacefully in their beds, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew older. Thomas, at 18, told Samuel he wanted to stay on the ranch and work alongside him rather than seeking his own land. Samuel was pleased but made sure Thomas understood that the ranch would be his someday, that he would not just be a hired hand but a partner and eventual owner. James developed into a skilled rider and handler of animals. At 8 years old, he could rope a calf as well as most men twice his age. He remained adventurous and occasionally reckless, giving Grace more than a few gray hairs before her time. Sarah, at 5, was proving to be very much her mother's daughter. She loved books and learning, and she would sit still for hours listening to stories or practicing her letters. She was also developing a strong sense of justice and fairness, often standing up for Benjamin when she thought he was being treated unfairly. Benjamin, the baby, was now 3 years old and living up to the strong-willed promise of his infancy. He was stubborn and determined, insisting on doing everything himself even when he clearly needed help. But he was also affectionate and sweet, freely giving hugs and kisses to everyone in the family. In 1893, 10 years after Grace first arrived in Wasco, the family attended a community celebration marking the 10th anniversary of the town's incorporation. There was a fair with games and races, food and music. The whole community came out, and it was a day of joy and fellowship. Grace stood with Samuel, watching their children play with other kids from nearby ranches. Thomas was talking with a girl his age, the daughter of Peter Wright, and from the way they were looking at each other, Grace suspected romance might be blooming. James was in the middle of a foot race, his competitive spirit on full display. Sarah and Benjamin were playing a game with other small children, their laughter ringing out across the fairgrounds. "This is a good life," Samuel said quietly, echoing Grace's thoughts. "It is," she agreed. "The best life." Mrs. Chen, now elderly but still sharp as ever, made her way over to them. "Look at you two," she said with satisfaction. "I knew that day I introduced you that something special would happen, but even I could not have imagined all of this." She gestured to the children. 4 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and you two still looking at each other like newlyweds. "We owe you everything," Grace said, hugging the older woman carefully. "If you had not taken me in that day, had not introduced me to Samuel, none of this would exist." "You made your own happiness," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "I just provided an introduction. The rest was your doing, both of you." As the sun set on the celebration, the Frost family headed home together. The children were tired and happy, piled into the back of the wagon with blankets. Grace sat beside Samuel on the bench, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "You remember the first time we rode out to the ranch together?" Grace asked. 10 years ago, almost exactly. I was so nervous. I had no idea if you would really hire me, or what would happen if you did. I remember thinking you looked terrified but trying to hide it. I remember wanting to protect you from whatever you were running from, and I remember thinking that you had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. I thought you looked tired and worried, like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I wanted to help you, even though I had just met you. You did help me. You helped all of us. Thomas was just a shell of himself before you came. I was barely keeping my head above water. You gave us hope and love and a future." Grace lifted her head to look at him. "We gave each other those things. That is what makes this work. We are partners in everything." "Partners," Samuel agreed and kissed her as the stars came out overhead. The years continued to pass. Grace marked the passage of time by her children's growth and the accumulation of small joys. James's first successful cattle drive. Sarah learning to play the piano on the instrument Samuel surprised them with one Christmas. Benjamin starting his lessons with the same enthusiasm, if not focus, as his siblings. Thomas announcing his engagement to Mary Wright and the wedding that followed, bringing another member into their growing family. When Thomas and Mary's first child was born, a boy they named Samuel after his grandfather, Grace held her grandson and marveled at the fullness of her life. She was only 39 years old, but she was already a grandmother, and the realization filled her with wonder. "Your mother would have loved to see this," she whispered to Thomas as he looked at his son with awe. "She would have been so proud of the man you have become." "I remember her," Thomas said quietly. "Not as clearly as I used to, but I remember her kindness, her laughter. And I remember you stepping into that role when I needed a mother. You will never know how much that meant to me, Grace. You saved my life in every way that matters." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You saved mine too. You and Samuel both. You gave me a family when I thought I would spend my life alone. You gave me purpose and love and belonging." In the spring of 1898, 15 years after Grace's arrival in Oregon, Samuel surprised her with a trip. He arranged for Thomas and Mary to watch the children and took Grace on a journey to the coast. They spent a week in a small hotel overlooking the Pacific Ocean, walking on the beach and enjoying time together without the demands of ranch life and child rearing. One evening, as they watched the sunset over the water, Samuel took Grace's hand. "I wanted to bring you here to thank you. For 15 years, you have been the center of everything good in my life. You have loved me and my nephew as your own. You have given me 3 more children and made our house a home. You have worked harder than anyone should have to work, often without complaint. I wanted you to know that I see all of it, and I appreciate all of it, and I love you more now than I did the day we married." "Samuel," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion, "you do not need to thank me for living the life I always wanted. Every day with you and the children is a gift. I am the one who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a woman with nothing. You looked past the dismissal and the lack of references and saw who I really was. You gave me everything I have. My home, my family, my happiness. It is all because of you." "No," Samuel said firmly. "It is because of us, because we chose each other and we chose to build this life together. Neither of us could have done it alone." Grace kissed him, tasting salt from the sea air and the tears on her own cheeks. "I love you, Samuel Frost, today and always. And I love you, Grace Frost, today and always." They returned home renewed and refreshed, ready to face the demands of their busy household. James, now 14, was starting to notice girls and causing his mother some worry with his reckless behavior. Sarah, at 11, was becoming a beautiful young woman, thoughtful and kind like her mother. Benjamin, at 8, remained a handful but was also showing signs of his father's steady reliability underneath his stubborn exterior. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that scared them, arguments and disagreements as the children grew into their own personalities. But through it all, Grace and Samuel faced everything together, united in their commitment to each other and their family. In 1901, James announced he wanted to join a cattle drive that would take him as far as Wyoming. He was 17, nearly a man, and ready for adventure. Grace wanted to refuse, to keep her son safe at home, but Samuel reminded her gently that they had to let their children grow and find their own paths. "He is my baby," Grace protested, even though she knew Samuel was right. "He is a young man," Samuel countered. "And he needs to test himself, to see what he is capable of. We have raised him well. We have to trust that he will make good decisions." Grace reluctantly agreed, and James left on the drive in early summer. The 3 months he was gone were some of the longest of Grace's life. She worried constantly, imagining all the things that could go wrong. When James finally returned in September, taller and broader and with new confidence in his eyes, Grace burst into tears and hugged him fiercely. "I am all right, Ma," James said, using the name he had called her since he was old enough to talk. "I had a great time. I saw mountains and rivers and more cattle than you can imagine, and I learned a lot, but I am glad to be home." "I am glad you are home too," Grace said, not letting go. That winter, the family gathered around the fireplace on Christmas Eve, a tradition they had observed every year since Grace arrived. The children, ranging from Benjamin at 11 to Thomas at 27 with his wife and 2 children, filled the house with noise and laughter. Grace looked around at all of them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she had dreamed of as a lonely orphan in boarding school. This was what she had longed for as a governess in other people's homes, watching their children and wondering if she would ever have her own family. This noisy, chaotic, beautiful gathering of people connected by love and blood and choice. Samuel caught her eye across the room and smiled, and Grace smiled back. They had built this together, starting from almost nothing. A desperate woman without prospects and a worried man trying to raise his orphaned nephew. From that uncertain beginning had grown this strong, loving family. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Grace and Samuel stood together looking out at the snow falling softly outside. "Another good year," Samuel said, a statement more than a question. "The best," Grace agreed. "Though I say that every year, do I not?" "You do. And it is true every year. Each year is better than the last because we are building something together. Our family, our life. It just keeps growing and getting richer." "Do you think Sarah and James will be all right?" Grace asked, voicing a worry that had been growing in her mind. Sarah, now 15, was attracting attention from young men in the area, and James, at 18, was talking about striking out on his own soon. "They will be fine. We raised them well. They know right from wrong, they know how to work hard, and they know they are loved. That is all we can give them. The rest is up to them." "When did you become so wise?" Grace asked, leaning into him. "I had a good teacher," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "A certain governess who showed me that love and patience can heal almost anything." "She sounds wonderful," Grace teased. "She is. Best thing that ever happened to me." The years continued their steady march. Sarah married at 19 to a rancher's son from a neighboring spread, a good man named Daniel Harrison who loved her and treated her well. James, after working on the ranch for a few more years, decided to try his hand at horse breeding and bought land near Pendleton, about 60 miles away. Benjamin, more serious and studious than his brother, surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to go to the agricultural college in Corvallis to learn modern ranching techniques. By 1910, Grace and Samuel were in their 50s, slowing down a bit but still active and healthy. The ranch was now primarily run by Thomas and his sons, though Samuel still worked every day and probably always would. Grace's hair was more gray than auburn now, and Samuel had lines etched deep in his face from years of sun and wind, but they were content. They had 6 grandchildren now, with more on the way. Their house, which had once seemed so large and empty, was regularly filled with visiting family. Grace spent her days cooking for crowds, mending clothes, reading to grandchildren, and generally being the matriarch of a large and thriving family. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace realized with a start that it had been 27 years since she arrived in Wasco. More than half her life ago now. That frightened young woman seemed like a different person, someone from a story rather than her own past. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, always attuned to her moods. "Just how far we have come. From that first day when Mrs. Chen introduced us to now. All of this." She gestured at the ranch, the house, the evidence of their full life. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it is real. It is real. We built it together day by day, year by year. You and me and the children, all of us working together. I never imagined I could be this happy," Grace admitted. "When I was younger, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, not to orphans without prospects. And then you hired me to raise Thomas and everything changed." "You raised all of us," Samuel said. Thomas, our children, even me. You raised my heart, Grace. Before you came, I was closed off, going through the motions but not really living. You taught me how to love, how to be part of a family, how to really live instead of just existing. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. That is the most beautiful thing you have ever said to me. It is the truth. You took a broken man and a broken boy and healed us both. You created a home where there was just a house. You gave us love when we had forgotten what that felt like. You raised my heart, and I will love you for that until the day I die. Grace turned in her chair and kissed him, tasting salt from both their tears. And you gave me a place to belong. You saw past the dismissal and the lack of references to who I really was. You trusted me with your nephew and your home and eventually your heart. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, holding hands like they had done countless times over the years. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Mary getting their children settled for the night. In the barn, the horses were quiet. Across the ranch, cattle grazed peacefully in the gathering darkness. It was an ordinary evening, no different from thousands of others they had shared. But it was also extraordinary because they were together, because they had this life, because out of a desperate situation and a chance meeting had grown something beautiful and lasting. As stars began to appear overhead, Grace leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder and thought about the letter that had dismissed her all those years ago. Unacceptable moral character, it had said. She had protected a child and been punished for it, cast out with no reference and no prospects. That letter had seemed like the end of her life. Instead, it had been the beginning. If she had not been fired, she never would have gotten on that train. If she had not come to Wasco, she never would have met Mrs. Chen. If she had not met Mrs. Chen, she never would have been introduced to Samuel. If she had not met Samuel, none of this extraordinary life would have happened. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you were actually blessings in disguise. Sometimes the doors that slammed in your face were actually pushing you toward the doors that were meant to open. Sometimes, when you lost everything, you were actually being given the chance to find what you truly needed. Grace had been fired with no reference, abandoned by society and left to fend for herself. And Samuel Frost, a cowboy rancher struggling to raise his orphan nephew, had hired her despite her lack of credentials. He had not hired her to be a governess or a housekeeper, though she had done both those jobs. He had hired her to raise his heart, to teach him and Thomas how to be a family again, how to love and trust and hope. And in the process, she had found her own heart raised as well. Found love and family and belonging in the middle of the high desert of Oregon. Found her true purpose and her true home. It had been an unlikely beginning. A desperate woman and a worried man, brought together by circumstance and chance. But from that uncertain start had grown a love that spanned decades, a family that spread across eastern Oregon, a legacy of kindness and hard work and devotion that would continue for generations. As they sat together under the stars, Grace and Samuel did not need to speak. They had said everything that needed to be said over the years. Their love was written in every aspect of the ranch, in every child and grandchild, in every decision they had made together, in every challenge they had overcome side by side. The governess who had been fired with no reference had found the cowboy who needed his heart raised. And together, they had built something beautiful. That was the story Grace would tell her grandchildren and great-grandchildren someday. Not that life was easy or that everything always worked out the way you planned, but that sometimes, when you least expected it, the right person came along at the right time. And if you were brave enough to take the chance, to trust and hope and love despite your fears, you could build a life more wonderful than any you had imagined. The evening grew late, and Samuel stood, offering Grace his hand to help her up. They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light, into the home they had built together over 27 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys. There would be work to do, family to care for, a ranch to run. But they would face it together as they always had. Because Grace Zimmerman, the governess without prospects, and Samuel Frost, the cowboy rancher, had found in each other exactly what they needed. She had raised his heart, and he had given her a home. And that simple exchange, that mutual giving and receiving of love, had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was not the life either of them had planned. It was better. It was real and hard and beautiful and true. It was family and love and partnership and home. It was everything that mattered. And as Grace climbed into bed that night, Samuel's arm around her and the sounds of their family in the house around them, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. For the job she had lost that led her here, for Mrs. Chen's kindness, for Samuel's trust, for Thomas and the children and the grandchildren, for every moment of this unexpected, extraordinary life. She had been fired with no reference, abandoned with nothing but a carpetbag and $7. And from that desperate situation had grown everything she had ever wanted. Sometimes, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, the worst moments of your life were actually the beginning of the best ones. You just had to be brave enough to keep moving forward, to trust that something better was coming, to believe that love and hope were worth the risk. Grace Frost had been brave enough. And because of that courage, because she had not given up on that dusty train platform in Wasco all those years ago, she had found her true home. Not just a physical place, but a family, a purpose, a love that would sustain her for all her days. The governess had raised the cowboy's heart, and in doing so, she had finally raised her own.